This is lesson 1-7, midpoint and distance in the coordinate plane. And today we're going to do two very important formulas that you need to memorize. So we'll just review what midpoint is. You've heard both of these terms before. Remember, midpoint is a point that divides a segment into two congruent segments. So it's basically the point in the middle, a point that divides the segment into two congruent segments. So if we have a number line like this, and I have the coordinates of A and B, the midpoint is the point in the middle. As you can see, these are 4 apart, so the midpoint's right in the middle. All you would need to do to find the midpoint is to add A plus B and divide it by 2. So it's sort of like finding an average. Now when I have points like this that are on the x-y axes, then they have both an x and a y axis, and you can't really count to find the middle. So what we do is we use our midpoint formula, which you want to copy down. x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Okay, so basically what we're doing is you're adding the x coordinates and you're dividing by 2. You're taking the average of the x coordinates, you're adding the y coordinates, and you're dividing by 2. It doesn't matter which x and which y you start with, you will be adding them. So if I take the coordinates of A is x1, so I'm going to add x1, and B is x2. I add those and I divide by 2. You can see that right here. It might be a little bit easier when we do it with numbers. And you do the same thing with the y's. Okay, so that's the midpoint. It's a point that divides a segment into two congruent segments. Very important formula right here that we will be using a lot. So please make sure that you copy it and memorize it. So let's try a problem with numbers. RS has the endpoints. R is the point 5, negative 10. And S is the point 3, 6. And what are the coordinates of its midpoint M? So I want to find the midpoint. I'm going to take, if it helps, you want to write x1, y1, x2, y2 above the points. That's fine. But I want to take my x coordinates, the 5 and the 3, and I'm going to add them. And I'm going to divide by 2. Then I'm going to take my y coordinates, the negative 10 and the 6, and I'm going to add them, and I'm going to divide by 2. So if you want to use a calculator, you can if you have trouble with signed numbers. But I'm adding these, I'm dividing by 2, 8 divided by 2. Negative 10 plus 6 is negative 4 divided by 2. And then my midpoint will always be a coordinate. So it's going to have an x coordinate, a y coordinate. It will be in parentheses, and it will have a comma between them. Okay, so that's my midpoint. Now we also talked about distance before. Distance is the length of a segment. So if you ever see a problem where they ask you to find the length of something, then we're going to use our distance formula. The distance between 2 points, A is the point x1, y1, and B is the point x2, y2. So if I want to find the length right here of AB, I can't just count because it's not a horizontal or a vertical line that I can just count the boxes easily. But as you can see, if I'm finding the length of AB, I sort of make a right triangle out of this. So from A to here, and then from here to B, I'm making a right triangle, and at this point you could use the Pythagorean theorem. And as you're going to see in a second, the distance formula, which is right here, so D equals the square root x2 minus x1 squared, that's in parentheses, plus y2 minus y1 squared. This is derived from the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so it should look a little bit familiar to you. So distance formula is the square root, parentheses x2 minus x1 squared, plus y2 minus y1 squared. Okay, and always remember that this is in parentheses and you're squaring it. So even if you have a negative number here, it's being squared, so you're always going to get a positive. Okay, and it doesn't matter which x1 or y1 that you start with as long as you're consistent. If I'm starting with x2, then on this side I have to start with y2. Okay, let's try it with a problem. So I want to find what is the distance between u, which is negative 7, 5, and v, which is 4, negative 3. Now if you want to, again, if you want to write x1, y1, x2, y2, you certainly can. Okay, so I start by writing my formula. The distance is the square root x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So I'm going to take my x coordinates, the negative 7 and the 4, and I'm going to subtract them. So 4 minus negative 7 squared, and then I'm going to take my y coordinates. Now since I started with the 4, that was the first x I started with, you have to start with this y. So it's going to be negative 3 minus 5 squared. So this minus negative becomes a plus positive, and negative 3 minus 8 is going to be negative 8 squared. but it doesn't matter because I'll be squaring it, so it will become positive again. So this is 4 plus 7, which is 11 squared, plus negative 8 squared. And that's radical 121 plus 64. And I get radical 185. Now, the problem will tell you if they want you to simplify it, and we will go over simplifying radicals again. In this particular case, I'm just writing it as a decimal. Usually they'll tell you to find it to the nearest tenth or something like that. Okay, so those two formulas are important. Make sure that you know them when you come in tomorrow.